This very month is well, actually, I have a slide for this. I had a lot of fun putting this PowerPoint together, so you'll forgive me for silly slides for some of the things I want to talk about. But this is the 101st anniversary of the birth of modern advertising. Because it was in 1904, May of 1904, that a famous meeting took place. It took place between two of the three great founders of modern advertising. The man on the left is Albert Lasker, and this meeting took place with the man in the center, the first really brilliant copywriter, John E. Kennedy, in 1904. Albert Lasker was the son of a prosperous German immigrant, and he could have almost had any career he wanted. He started out as a reporter in journalism, and he got the idea that he really liked advertising. He saw that with the right advertising, businesses flourished. They made their founders and key executives wealthy beyond the dreams of avarice. But in many cases, the advertising didn't work, and he had no idea what are the factors that make it work when it does work, and what are the factors that don't work for those where it's failing. And he was searching all over the country for somebody who can give him a better idea about how to, what the factors of great advertising are. And he found his way to the Lord and Thomas ad agency in Chicago in the early 1900s. He started at age 18, and he started out cleaning the spittoons in the office and then the saloon downstairs. And within 2 years, he was the owner of the agency. He was such a go-getter. He was great in personal sales presentations. He could sort of charm the birds out of the trees. In fact, later he teamed up with Claude Hopkins, and Claude Hopkins said of him, there's nobody who could resist the persuasive power of Albert Lasker when Albert wanted you to do something. So he was very persuasive personally, but he had no idea of how to translate this personal magnetism into advertising. And he was in the office of the owner of the company at that time when he was young. It was Mr. Thomas. And they were talking about business, and a bellman brought a note up and handed it to Mr. Thomas, who was the head of the ad agency. And the note said as follows. This is probably the first great direct mail letter, at least in terms of starting modern advertising. The little note came from the man in the middle. He was a Canadian Mountie turned copywriter, and he wrote it as follows. Dear Mr. Thomas, I am in the saloon downstairs. I can tell you what advertising is. I know that you do not know. Well, see, copywriters always have this attitude that, it will mean much to me to have you know, and it will mean much to you. If you wish to know what advertising is, send the word yes down by the bellboy. And he signed the letter. And this is this is not an urban myth, because Lasker recorded this exactly as it happened, and being a journalist, he said exactly, factually, how this meeting took place, and he saved that note. And Mr. Thomas said, boy, the cranks who wander into that saloon downstairs. And so he was about to throw it, and Lasker, though, had great curiosity. He said, look, I'll meet with him. Maybe he can teach us something. Who knows? And so he and John E. Kennedy had a meeting. And Kennedy said, Mr. Lasker, I've heard about your reputation. You're really good at what you do. But you've been asking all the heads of the other agencies, what is good advertising? And I've heard, because word in the industry is you haven't found a good answer yet. Well, I have the answer. But let me ask you first, so you'll know that I'm giving you this answer, and it's not coming from anyone else. What do you think? Let me test you. What do you think good advertising is? So he said, I really have been trying to find out the answer to that, and as close as I can come to understand it, and maybe this is because I'm a journalist, I think advertising is news about a product. And John E. Kennedy said, no. News is a technique of presentation. That's not what advertising is. Advertising is salesmanship in print. And those three words were the foundation of modern advertising. In fact, when David Ogilvy wrote his book, Ogilvy on Advertising, great book, he said, there's never been an improvement on that definition. I think there may be one slight improvement, which came along later by the man on the right, the all-time greatest king of copywriters, Claude Hopkins, who said, well, there are different media, so to say salesmanship in print. If it's on radio, that's not print. So let's call great advertising multiplied salesmanship, because that's what it is. Now, I know that some of you, and this has been sort of the gospel of direct marketers, and we wish, the other people on Madison Avenue, up and down these canyons, and Madison Avenue is this way and Fifth Avenue is that way. There are thousands of agencies within this radius of 2 miles, yet very few of them know about this definition because they don't measure their advertising. They just run it on TV, and if it gets a good laugh from the person in the next cubicle, they think it's a big hit, and it's an entertaining ad. But those who measure their advertising, as we all do in this room, know the value of that definition. We want to sell more of our goods. We don't just want to win an award or applause, because what multiplied salesmanship is a single good salesperson able to talk to 1,000 people or 1,000,000 people at once. And so if you're really good at selling, look at the leverage that gets you. Instead of knocking on 1,000 doors in one ad or one commercial, you can have one really good salesperson talk and close a sale with perhaps 1,000,000 people. So it's tremendous leverage when it's done right. It can build wealth very rapidly. And so I know that some of you know this story, and yet maybe we don't know it as well as we think, because even if we knew the definition of multiplied salesmanship, really what is salesmanship? The nature of salesmanship, and now this is where we're going to start taking this into a whole new level of understanding of how to get breakthrough results in our packages today, in our space ads and any other direct marketing that we do. Because we've been sort of coasting, the advertising agency business and copywriters of all types who apply this philosophy have been coasting on the coattails of this definition for 100 years. But over the last 100 years, things have changed radically. What was salesmanship back in the days of Hopkins and Lasker is much different than it is today. I remember reading books from salespeople written back in those early days. Say Elmer Wheeler was a great sales philosopher. He says, "Sell the sizzle, never the steak." And there's one, my favorite title, "Timid Salesmen Have Skinny Kids." And in a sense, that's still true, but it sort of described a method of salesmanship that was sort of very manipulative and very high pressure. It's sort of like a life insurance agent cornering somebody, and when they didn't have any objection left, you had to sign the policy to send the guy away from your home. Woody Allen's definition of hell is an eternal airline trip seated next to a life insurance agent. But that was the nature of selling, because I know a lot of people in life insurance have been taught that. There's a quick answer for every objection, and you sort of just wear the client out. But we don't have that advantage in advertising, because speaking to 10,000 prospects at once or 1,000,000, we don't have any power in the situation. We're not in a face-to-face relationship with these folks who are our prospects, and so they can just toss our piece or in the garbage can instantly, or turn the page, or just dismiss us without our even knowing it. So in a very real sense, salesmanship changes radically when it moves from the person-to-person type of salesmanship, and also over the years how our audience has changed, because we are so inundated with advertising today that you cannot expect your prospects to be like babes in the woods who've never seen a good sales presentation before. They are processing and trying to avoid sales presentations at all times. And that is a much more powerful factor than it ever was 100 years ago, even 50 years ago, when John Caples and David Ogilvy were teaching us how to sell. We face a much different situation today because of the tremendous tidal wave of marketing that everyone is hurling at us as prospects, as consumers. So I think if we want to think about salesmanship now, how do we understand what salesmanship is? And to me, I want to simplify everything so easily and perfectly that we can walk out of this room being very good salespeople and knowing what it takes to be a good salesperson, in print or in person. So let's divide all of salesmanship into 2 categories. And it's very simple. Opening the sale, starting the conversation with our prospects, and then closing the sale, coming home with the order. And there are different skills in each one of those 2. So let's take a look now at the two overreaching categories of skills in all of salesmanship. If you can get really good at opening the sale with your prospects and then taking home the order, that's all you need to know. So let's focus first on opening the sale. Now to do this, I'm going to start each of these major sections with a story. In this case, a very interesting story about a man known as Captain John Raid. Nothing to do with advertising except that he's a master fisherman. Pauline and I have for many years owned a home out in Amagansett. Those of you not from New York, I'll explain it. Sort of Long Island east sticks out like a long finger into the Atlantic, and as such, it's a great, the very tip of Long Island is one of the world-class fishing grounds because when fish migrate, they hit into this big piece of land, they come around the point of Long Island, which is known as Montauk Point. And many of the fishing world records come out of captains come from the boats of captains who have caught these fish out of Montauk. So it's a great center of fishing boats, commercial fishing fleets, party fishermen, the sports anglers go out all the time, and then charter boats. It's a very interesting harbor if you're ever out on the end of Long Island to see Montauk Point. And it's also the home of many legendary fishing captains, including, for example, Frank Mundus, the great white shark hunter who was the model of the captain in Jaws. He's an actual guy and loves to catch great white shark on rod and reel. That's his idea of fun, I guess. But Captain Frank Mundus, as well as every other fishing captain out there, holds one man in just awe. I mean, he towers above in ability every other captain out there, and they will all readily admit it. And his name is Captain John Raid. In fact, the East Hampton Star, which is the major newspaper of the East End of Long Island, ran a story about him last year. And you can see Captain John here, maestro of rod and reel, and you can see a typical day's catch. These are striped bass, these bins that he comes in with. Now what he is, he's known as a pin hooker, which is the rarest of all type of fishermen on the East End. He is somebody who has a commercial fishing license, which means you don't want all the boats just wiping out the entire schools of fish. So sports fishermen are allowed only a couple of fish each day, and they have to be a certain size. Commercial fishermen who fish for food as a business, you're allowed 100 pounds of striped bass and 100 pounds of some other fish, if it's summer flounder or whatever. John Raid is a commercial fisherman, which means he's allowed to catch the hundreds of pounds of fish per day of different species, and depending on the year, you have a different limit. So he goes out with a rod and reel. Now, he doesn't do this with nets like the other commercial fishermen do. No nets, no giant trawlers with those side beams or whatever they are, and no big crews of 5 or 6 fishermen. He goes out on his little putt-putt motorboat with a rod and reel, comes home with hundreds and hundreds of pounds of fish. To put that in perspective, on a given Saturday in the summer, there's a Viking Starship, which is a big boat that it's called a party boat where anybody can come, any angler, sports fishermen come, and so they'll take out 50 or 60 fishermen on a Saturday. He will outfish all 50, 60 fishermen by a long shot in the same water. So they asked him, Captain John, how do you do this? I mean, this is an astonishing feat, and you do it every day. And it's not just when the fish are biting. He will come in almost every day with his limit. And he said something that is profoundly important to us as marketers. When they asked him, Captain John, how do you do this? He thought for a moment, and you can see he's getting up in years, and he's been a fisherman since he was just a child. And he said, when most fishermen go out, and I'd like you to substitute the word marketer for fisherman, you'll get this message right away. When most fishermen go out to fish, they're thinking like fishermen. When I go out to fish, I think like a fish. And his whole life has been devoted to how can I think more like a fish. And as marketers, how often do we think like marketers and almost forget what it feels like to be our prospect? And so he'll tell you that in a typical bait and tackle store, the fisherman goes in and wants to buy every feathered lure and fancy rod and reel. But he said most of that is designed to catch fishermen, not fish. And he will study everything there is to know about fish and what their life is like when they're hungry, when the seasons change, when what bait is running in the water. In fact, the most important thing that he studies is not even the fish itself, but the ocean. Because it's the ocean that the fish swim in that determines the temperature of the water, the currents, what bait is running, and by knowing the conditions of the ocean, he has a much better feeling for how to catch a lot more fish. And if we apply that same thinking, we start to see a lot of different things going on with our prospects than if we think of ourselves only as marketers. And if we learn to do this during these next 2 days, if you can start thinking more like the fish and not so much as the fisherman. I've tried to find a non-sexist way to say fisherman. It just doesn't work. In fact, Captain Linda Greenlaw, who was the captain who avoided the perfect storm, up in that true story about the perfect storm, when a reporter asked her, should I call you fisherman? I should call you fisherwoman. Is that a word? She says, no, I'm a fisherman, and I'm proud of it. That's what you should call me. So if it's good enough for Captain Linda, it's good enough for me. But if we can learn to apply this thinking to our marketing, there's one idea will prove so valuable to you over the course of your marketing life, to think more like a fish, not so much like a fisherman.